Hello, hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you here with me today. You are in for a treat because today's episode is one of our special Spotlight series episodes, where I shine the spotlight on other mystic dog mamas who are bringing their light to the world. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Amy Arnold. Amy has such a unique and interesting story that echoes what so many of us experience. The dissatisfaction that comes from a life that's no longer resonant, and then the quest to discover just what that kind of life might look and feel like. After 26 years as a practicing plastic surgeon, Amy left the medical profession behind and started down the path of finding what purpose meant to her. She explored a variety of avenues, including an 11-day vision quest, studying shamanism, and even writing. She now brings together her life experiences and skills to support other women to find their own true sense of purpose, their true story. Amy and I talked a lot about the nature of stories, our personal stories and our cultural stories. We also talked about how our dogs mirror back to us the dysfunction of our culture stories by the expectations that we place on them, and then how they offer us the gift of seeing where our own personal stories are asking to be modified, which is something that Amy has personally experienced with her gorgeous 11-year-old Italian Greyhound, Sophia. In this conversation, we also highlight our power to change our stories, all while acknowledging that this process brings a lot of discomfort, especially when we're in that liminal space in between letting go of one story, and yet the next story hasn't quite appeared yet. Amy has a beautiful gift for Mystic Dog Mama listeners. She's developed a unique coaching opportunity specifically for us that I know you're going to want to hear more about. So stay tuned until the end for more details. We mentioned a couple of books that we're reading that you might also want to check out. I've left links to those in the show notes. Finally, a quick note that this episode was sponsored by Aspirationary, which in full transparency is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to help you become all you aspire to be. You can check out our shadow work and moon magic journals and workbooks, as well as our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens on Instagram, and that's at our Aspirationary account spelled ASPIRATIONERY. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Amy. I'm so excited that you're joining me here on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Alexia, for inviting me. It's going to be, I think, a fun and wide-ranging conversation today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I wanted to just let the audience know a little bit of why I wanted to bring you on for this Spotlight series. And in the Spotlight series of Mystic Dog Mama, I love to bring on other Mystic Dog Mamas who are doing incredible things and just have some really interesting conversations around what it looks like to be walking the spiritual path, and particularly for those of us with dogs, how our dogs inform that. And I thought you would just be such a perfect person to talk to, especially since our mutual friend Gigi Silverman said, "You and Amy need to talk." And I was like, yeah, I think we do.
Yeah, that
So-
sounds good. And I wanted to tell you that when I saw the name of your podcast, I was just so intrigued because it's unique and so specific. Mystic Dog Mamas.
I know. You know what's kind of funny is that kind of came as a download, actually, as I was looking at for myself what it means for me to be walking the spiritual path. I've talked to listeners before about how I've been on the spiritual path for decades at this point, but how lucky coming into my life catalyzed it in a whole new way
Mhm.
and asked me to look at things a little bit differently and asked me to look at him differently and the way that he serves as a mirror. And I know we'll get into some of this with you and your beloved pup too, but
Mhm.
there's something about when you live with an animal like this, and particularly for those of us who are not only kind of into the mystical, but we also are interested in nature-based traditions and ideas of animism, where you recognize the life force that is in absolutely everything. All of a sudden, that creates this really beautiful context of learning in a way that takes you beyond the way that you traditionally learn with just yourself or with just studying a particular practice. Like they just catalyze a whole new level of learning that you weren't necessarily aware of when they first come into your lives.
I agree with that. And also it's different than having a human partner or family member, someone you live with. They can certainly be a mirror and make you face a lot of things about them and yourself. But yeah, with animals, there's a different flavor to it. And,
Mhm.
they can't talk. They can't at least not speak in human language that we understand. They definitely communicate with us. But yeah, they ask a lot of us if we're up for the challenge of growing with them, letting
Mm,
them help us grow. Yeah.
100%. 100%. So, Amy, I thought maybe we could start off by you just giving a little bit of a background of who you are.
Okay. I hate that. How do you
I
put
know.
it in a few sentences? Okay, I'm a life fulfillment coach. That's what I call myself. I'm a positive intelligence coach and retired from 26 years of plastic surgery practice and moved to North Carolina recently. And I would say to tell your listeners who I am, I'm someone who followed a more traditional path, was more science based, more rational, left brain thinking kind of person. And then in the last 10 years, just really realized that that was not fulfilling and there was something missing. So began to pursue, just like you, lots of different avenues to find what is meaningful for me, what is my purpose. And so really launched out after a lot of preparation years and kind of burned my bridges behind me and completely quit the practice of medicine and a very comfortable, lucrative career, to be honest, and just loving that I did that.
That's amazing. Was there something in particular that catalyzed that for you?
It was, I think, when I really day to day seeing patients, I loved my patients and just asking myself, what do I love about doing this? And where is something missing? What is the hole that's unfilled? And what I loved was the ongoing relationships that I had with people and just being able to have an intimacy with them. When someone keeps coming back to see you for something like your appearance, I was doing all injections at the end, Botox and fillers. It's very personal, very intimate, very vulnerable. And just realizing that that kind of connection, I could help people so much more than just putting a pretty face on it and making certainly they felt value and having more self-confidence. But I felt I can help them at the root level of why they are unhappy, why they are discontent, why they have low self-esteem, or all those other things. So I think it was that realization. But then I didn't know at first how to do that. So it took a while.
Mm, mm. Oh, I love that. It's as though you're kind of going the full spectrum, right? Which you're supporting you had been supporting people with the external and then flipped into the internal world and started there with how to best support them. I love that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
what were some of the things that you have found helpful along your path with that? What kind of things have you explored that have supported you on that journey of supporting other women?
Mm. I think the first thing was just developing my self-awareness. And I was involved with a group in Fort Lauderdale where I was for 27 years. I was with them for almost 6 years, and it was very intensive, individual and group. They call it training in self awareness. They called it a confrontational technique. It was really hard. It
Mm,
it it was an amazing experience. It's not for everybody. It has some flavors of a cult. I'm going to be honest, but I got so much out of it. Like I am a totally different person
Mm.
after working with them. But I did ultimately leave them because I reached a point where I realized this isn't all there is. There's some of this I'm not aligned with, and it's actually holding me back. And so then I just started to really branch out and explore. And I know you are into hedge witchcraft. Is that what you call
Mm-hmm.
it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with that. I looked at it. Didn't appeal to me personally, but I think it's really neat and fascinating. But I ended up studying shamanism through a very strange series of things, and also doing an 11-day vision quest in North Carolina, which involved 4 days and nights of fasting alone with a tarp in the woods and just water to drink. And so yeah, I've done my own version of uh finding guidance,
Yeah.
and just I think what's helped me to answer your question in a more general terms is follow what's attracting me, follow what I'm drawn to, and see where it goes. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, 100%. I so agree with that. And actually, when I was reflecting on these ideas of purpose, because I think so often in our culture, we are sold this idea of purpose being like a big external thing. And oftentimes, particularly in the West, we associate that with a job. Like
Yep.
I'm living my purpose if I'm doing a particular job that's aligned. And I started really questioning that, even though there was a period of time where I was helping women find their purpose, and many of them were coming to me from that career perspective. And I felt very challenged with there's something more to this than just finding the right job. Of course, that can be part of your purpose, right? But it's not for me, anyways, it's not the defining thing. And it wasn't until Lucky came to me, and I got him during the lockdown period, and so the whole world was changed, right? And my whole day to
Mhm.
day was very different, and I had a lot of focus on this little dog, and I started to kind of delve deeper into what purpose looked like for me and how I was defining that. And the thing that I've ultimately come to, and I'd love for you to kind of riff off of this if that feels comfortable for you, and challenge what I'm saying as well. But purpose for me kind of boiled down to that internal tug that we feel towards something. And it can be as small, for me anyways, it was like as small as like, do I want a cup of tea right now? And feeling like a if you've done muscle testing like that, or sway testing within muscle testing, that kind of pull forward, it was like, yes. And it's like, okay, so following that is part of following purpose, or following bliss, as Joseph Campbell talks about. And it was like, do I wanna go and do this right now? Do I wanna go and do that right now? And really getting back in touch at a very embodied level, actually, for what do I feel drawn to? And for me, I started identifying that as purpose rather than it being like save the whales. Sure, that can be part of your purpose, but how do we experience it on a very like simplistic daily level? For me, it was like, what am I feeling drawn towards in this unfolding that is life? And it sounds a little bit like that was part of your experience too, of what do you feel pulled to?
Yes, I think you're right. And I do feel like my current understanding of finding your purpose is that it's not easy. It's a years long process.
Mhm.
It is coming from knowing your soul. If, that word gets misused and depends how you define it, but your inner blueprint for what you can be at your full potential as a human. I guess that's how I'll define it right now. Um, Accessing that should be easy, but it's horribly hard in our culture today. We don't have any systems or initiations or things set up to help us do that. So we're left with tools like going through the body. I totally agree with you. The body is the way to the soul. Um, Dreams, another great way. And then, if you get into Jungian psychology and analysis, I think that's another way. A vision quest is potentially another way. Um, but yeah, it's not easy. And absolutely agree, it's not a job. It's a who you're being. And then you can ideally find a job or something that you do in the external world that's aligned with that and helps you express that.
Oh, I love that. Definitely. Definitely. Did you find that your experience of the vision quest helped you to touch into your soul? And what was that like for you?
It was barely the beginning, but yes, it did. But it wasn't like, okay, I'm done now. I know, I know my purpose. I know what I need to do. Uh, the biggest take from it was understanding that who I'm being is way more important than what I'm doing, and that
Mm,
that's where my attention should be. That
mm,
was the biggest thing I got out of it. But I also got the other realms are real. The other worlds that we can't see, maybe you could call them energetic realms, shamanic realms, whatever you want to call them. They are real. And there's way more to the world beyond this superficial, everyday physical reality that we're used to. So I got that out of it too.
mm. Oh, I love it. And there's a lot of shamanism within hedge witchcraft as well, which I love. And that was actually part of what drew me to that specifically was that the hedge witch was the woman who lived on the edge of town. And she was the one who knew about herbs. She was the one that knew about plant medicine. She was the one that knew about working with energy. And in particularly in kind of the British landscape where a lot of this comes from, the hedges were where a lot of those plants grew and they were on the edge of town.
Mm.
So that's part of why she was there. But she was also feared because she had this knowledge, this wisdom. And so she was sort of relegated to the edges of town. But we talk about in hedge witchcraft that practice of shamanism where you are going into trance state in order to access the other worlds, in order to access other parts of your own psyche and other energies. We refer to it as crossing the hedge, as going, or you might think of it like crossing the veil, right? That there's this process of you keep one foot in this world and you take your other foot and you go into another one. So you're never completely separate from, but you're merging those two. And as a consequence, it's a practice where you are experiencing, if you're open to it, fuller versions of yourself. That is all you, right? Like you exist in all of these other realms. You're beyond just this kind of physicality of the 3D that you think about yourself. You are all of that. And when you are bringing back that knowledge, that wisdom, it's exactly like you're saying. It's how do you be it then? You get to embody that, you get to be that, and then take action from that place, from that expanded sense of self, rather than the kind of egoic small sense of self that's trapped in the worry, trapped in the kind of mundane. But you get to merge the two so that you are actually transforming the mundane. The mundane actually becomes really magical from that perspective.
I love how you said that. And yes, everything you said pretty much aligns with my understanding of what a shaman does and how they live and what they bring back to their community, and that they don't fit into the village, and nor should they, because if you are embedded in the stories and beliefs and culture of the village, then you cannot be the voice of wisdom that says, wait a minute, we're on the wrong path here. We need to do something else.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's very aligned. Thanks for explaining that, because I didn't know that about it. And
Yeah.
that was a beautiful description.
Well, I think the term witch is a kind of problematic one today, actually, to be honest, because it carries a lot of weight. But when you look back etymologically, witch comes from wise. So it's pointing to
Mhm.
the wisdom that you're speaking of. It was the person, it was, and generally it was the woman, like the woman carrying this wisdom. I think we have an innate connection to wisdom, that everybody has access to, but we sort of naturally tend to gravitate towards it. And yet it's also the thing that we've been vilified for and been made kind of the scapegoat for things and a lot of fear put around it. So the idea of witch kind of carries all of that. And I think that's where it is helpful to have conversations around it. Like, so what does that actually mean to practice it? Like, am I sitting there with a cauldron, and creating spells and all that kind of stuff? Yes and no. Yes and no. Like the cauldron is my soup pot, for example, and the intentions that I'm putting into the foods that I'm preparing. And again, from an animistic perspective, where you see everything as having a soul, being in right relationship with everything around me and being aware that my words are casting spells, if you want to use that language. Like I'm calling into being in the physical form according to the words that I'm using and speaking out loud, the power of all of that. And I think what undertaking the practice of hedge witchcraft has given me, one of the many things, is a better awareness of all that we are spell casting, we are creating all of the time. We're just usually doing it unconsciously. And so bringing a conscious lens to it puts you back in the seat of power to decide, how do I want to use this life force that I've got? How do I want to use my power? How do I want to use my words? And I think that's the beauty of much of these practices, like you had said, whichever path you go on, it's all ultimately leading you to the same place. And that is recognizing the power of who you truly are.
Yep. Yep. Well said.
What is your experience with shamanism? I'd love to hear some more about that.
Well, I found a teacher that teaches online. He used to be in person, but in COVID, he adapted wisely, and he's in Wales in the UK. And I started by reading his books and then discovered he taught classes. So I've been studying with him for about 3 years. And one of the biggest things that I've gotten out of that teaching and training is learning about animism and then experiencing living in an animistic way, which is very hard to do. I mean, I can't fully do it in today's world. It's almost impossible. But as you were alluding to, being aware that all beings, even rocks and stones and water and clouds, have a form of consciousness that, is not human consciousness. Obviously, it's different, but that you can learn to, I would say, ultimately experience being it with a lot of practice. But short of that, have empathy and awareness with it, that it deserves respect. And you mentioned relationship. That's hugely important in this work too, just like in hedge witchcraft. Relationship, healthy relationships, respectful relationships with all of the beings, including other humans, of course. um so yeah,
Mm.
forget where I was going with that. I'm all feeling warm and fuzzy inside now just talking about it.
Well, I think I agree. I always feel like that when I talk about this stuff. And I think so much of it is that we are yearning for that deep connection to ourselves, and ourselves, like capital S self, right? That part of us that is eternal, that part of us that is connected. And I think that's also why I'm really interested in talking to you specifically about a lot of this stuff too, because it relates to ideas of stories. Like, what are the stories we are so desperately trying to connect back to? And I think we were sort of talking before we came online that we're in this period, we're recording this during the dark moon right after the eclipse. Like we're in this amazing energy, this field of possibility. And I had gotten the call to do a meditation and pull a card before our conversation. And I was telling you that I was using this, it was an oracle gift or oracle deck that was gifted to me by a friend of my mom called the people can see it, the
Mhm.
Tulku Oracle. And as I was doing the meditation, this image of a barn owl's face came right up to me and was like huge in my face. And for me, the barn owl is a really special animal. I've actually seen a few in various points during my kind of awakening here, like recently, like different stages of things that have been going on for me, they've just appeared right, like right over the house. I will call out to them and two of them will come out, and two never seem to be together, but they have been around me. And they have been sort of an opening to me around the energy of Lilith. Anytime I see a barn owl, I immediately think Lilith, who for me is an archetype of a goddess or a deity or a figure from kind of Kabbalistic Judeo-Christian traditions, where she represents the part of us as women that has been quite literally demonized for standing in our truth and for speaking up and saying, actually, that doesn't resonate with me, or actually, I deserve something different. And she is that part of us that is calling to us to reclaim the power of who we are, to reclaim our stories as individuals, and to reclaim our stories as women generally. And when I'm using that term women, it's anyone who identifies as woman, that with that divine feminine energy. And so then when I went to draw a card, nobody's going to be surprised when I tell you what card it is. It was a Lilith card. And I was like, all right, Lilith's here with us. And I just thought it was so perfect for connecting with you today, because your work, as you have transitioned from the world of medicine and through your own personal journey and through into shamanism and into coaching, as well as the fact that you've done writing yourself, you are an author, that stories kind of underlie everything. And I really feel like individually and collectively, we are being called to revisit the stories that we hold as truth, that we tell ourselves, that we are telling others about ourselves, and to question whether or not they actually work for us anymore, and whether or not they are actually truth, and how we can find a deeper connection with the world around us. So going back to the animism concept as well, that to retell the story that's at the heart of who we are as humans, that we are part of all of this, that we are not separate from this, like the stories have been told to us and we have accepted. And I wondered if you might be interested in diving into a little bit what storytelling has meant to you, and what stories, the way that we need to think about stories as we are navigating this modern time.
That's such a great one. There's kind of two avenues that I could explore with that. Let's do the first one with the feminine being uh, put down, repressed, demonized, as you said. We can talk about that one. In my shamanic studies, my teacher talks about healthy stories that are original stories, stories that our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have tried to live by, and which the shaman of the group would have to make sure stayed in line with what was right, and, you know, including right relationships, but lots of other things too. And humans need stories. We need stories to make meaning out of our experience. We absolutely need them, but we can choose which stories we want to follow and believe and share. So stories about the feminine, there's so many that are negative. And you're right. I think that, it's not just in recent times, but maybe in the last, I don't know, few hundred years at least, women are stepping up and saying, wait a minute, this isn't right. You're not going to keep me down. Um, there's masculine and feminine energies, and you can relate that to the divine masculine and feminine. And in my studies, I've learned that they're equal and you need both, and you can't have just one, and one is not more important or better than the other. So once you fully realize that, then a lot of male-female interactions and definitely hierarchy doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't make sense. It's a cultural, unhealthy story. So the feminine is less than, wisdom maybe is less than knowledge. Heaven and hell, the mind, the body, and Mother Nature. I mean, all of that to me, all of the feminine is you could represent all of it as Mother Nature. And the body is the way to get there. Again, if you want to access your soul, that is the way to get there. The feminine is the way. And you could think of spirit as being more masculine, more father sky, if you want to go that way with those terms. So hopefully that makes sense. It's an unhealthy story to believe that the feminine and all that's associated with it is less than and doesn't matter. It doesn't mean we have equal roles and equal qualities. We don't. That's the beauty of it, is the opposites and the differences coming together and supporting each other. So I would say that about healthy stories about women and about everyone who's oppressed and minorities, and, hierarchy doesn't make sense. Inequality doesn't make sense. So those are very unhealthy stories, and there are so many of them. So I think part of accessing your soul and your purpose and stepping into your power and knowing true stories about yourself is learning to have critical thinking and questioning. Does this really make sense for me? Just because 95% of people around me believe it and say it and reinforce it doesn't mean it's true for me. So I think that's a huge part of it, is questioning everything. There are so many stories that we're embedded in that we can't even see them. We take them as absolute fact, and in fact, they are not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that rings very true. And something that has come into my world kind of recently, actually, has been work around the law of assumption. And I've been resistant to the law of attraction stuff because I think that so often it's so materially focused, like I'm going to manifest a car or whatever. And those things are great, but I don't think that that's really what we're here to do necessarily. That's part of our journey. And something that came to me with the law of assumption was more about how we are creating whatever the reality is that we think that we're experiencing. That it's that idea of we who we truly are is the I am, the witness of all of this. And we can choose what it is that we are experiencing. So we're choosing the story that we're putting forward. In fact, it's often referred to that we are on particular timelines, which you can think of as storylines, right? And so if we're at the helm of that, we get to choose without necessarily things having to change in our physical environment. We change the story that we're telling about it, and immediately our experience of it changes. And as a consequence, the physical reality follows too. That as you change the story around it, it starts reflecting back to you elements of the new story that you are telling. And so it reminds me so much of what you're saying, and that becoming aware, the need to become aware of the fact that we are embedded in story, and that it is not only our job in a sense to choose differently. It's like our privilege to choose. It is our birthright to choose differently. Like that's what we're here to do, is to we get to do that. We don't have to wait until a government changes or something big happens externally. Like we change that story right now. Like we don't even have to wait for tomorrow. Like we can do that right now. And that to me is something that's so empowering about stories, actually.
Yep. Those in power are not happy about stories. When the everyday common people start sharing their stories, huge changes can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So those in power have a lot of stories that they are invested in keeping intact for their own benefit. One story that, for whatever reason, is on my mind today is the story of necessary constant growth, which is part of the story of capitalism and consumerism. And that is a story that would be wonderful if we could change that. Just individuals changing that, as you're alluding to, and sharing that with other individuals, if enough of them start to challenge that story, a lot could change.
100%. Have you read, I've mentioned this in another episode because I'm currently obsessed with this book. Have you read Rest is Resistance by Trisha Hersey?
Nope.
Oh my gosh, that needs to be added to your list, and then we can talk about that too. It is so good. Trisha Hersey she's a writer, she's an activist, she's an artist, a poet. I mean, she's just incredible. And she talks about this idea that capitalism came directly out of the plantation culture, that it was tested there, and that it was built on the backs of slaves. And the relationship between the body and propagating the grind culture. So we see it now in terms of how it looks in grind culture. And like you're saying too, that everything has to be in a constant state of growth, exponential growth, despite the fact that we live on a planet with finite resources, that we still operate as though that's not true. And how we internalize that story around grind culture, that our worth is directly dependent upon ideas of production, and how often we'll evaluate at the end of the day, like how our day went according to how productive we were. And if we weren't productive enough, if you didn't get enough things checked off the to-do list, for example, that you then carry a sense of guilt or shame or unworthiness or what have you. And so she suggested, based upon kind of honoring her slave ancestors who didn't have this option, to rest, to just like take a nap. She formed the nap ministry for this, which I think is brilliant, of like saying no, that act of just simply stopping is a political act of resistance. And I was like, "Oh my
Mm.
gosh." And then I was corresponding it as well to how we transfer all of these stories that we carry for ourselves and the way we should be in the world and what things should look like. We then project onto our dogs and do the exact same thing and wonder why we have such issues with like reactivity and various behavior issues. And our dogs need to be put on antidepressants and all, the whole gamut. Like they are mirroring back to us the dysfunction of our society because we have chosen to believe these particular stories and act them out on a daily basis. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think you would really enjoy her book.
Awesome. Thanks for that recommendation.
You're welcome. It's selfishly motivated too because I want to be able to talk to you about it.
I love how you brought in the dog and pet part of that, you know, um, feeling like our relationship with animals in general is another story. Our relationship with nature, the horrible story that most of our cultures believes at some level because we're raised for generations believing this, is that we're in charge of nature. It is ours to do with as we please. It isn't it. It doesn't have rights or consciousness or feelings or any of that. And that story is tied in with the story of consumerism and, just as destructive, well, probably more destructive, and came first.
Hmm. Well, because we have to tell ourselves that story that we are separate from nature in order for us to propagate the destruction. Because
That's right.
we wouldn't be able to do that if we felt like in destroying nature, we're destroying ourselves. We just wouldn't.
That's right. I agree.
Mhm.
So we don't fully get it. We don't fully believe it. And the more you do understand it, though, the more terrible you can feel and the more despair you can feel. And we don't like that either. So that makes it hard too.
Mhm. Yeah, it does. But like you're saying, when we start to have an inkling, when there are those little moments where you realize, almost like a chink in the armor of these stories where you're like, huh, maybe that's not totally true, or oh, I don't
Mm-hmm.
really feel really great about that. Those are
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, if we choose to pursue them, to start that process of what you're describing, of using that critical thinking to then create new stories for ourselves and to see that there are other possibilities. I mean, I think that's the thing, right? Is that when we change the story, all of a sudden this whole other world opens up to us that from our perspective that we're at right now, we can't even see. That's the gift
That's
of
right.
shamanism, right? Like where you were saying, like these worlds are real. Once you experience that, it's like, whoa, what else is there that I was blind to?
That's so true. And what you're saying brings up another thing that's important in maybe not so much, well, maybe with personal changing stories as well as cultural changing stories, is it probably won't be evident what the new story should be.
Mhm,
You know, the old story doesn't fit anymore, but what should the new story be? And then there's that discomfort of unknowing. And then you might be tempted to rush into creating something that's not equally as unhealthy as.
mhm.
So I'm going to recommend a book to you, if
Ah,
that's
yes.
okay.
Oh, of course it is. Thank you.
And the author is Charles Eisenstein, and he's written many books, but the one I think you should start with is it's called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And it's all about the story of humanity and taking it apart bit by bit. And this book will blow you away. Well,
Mhm.
it did me. I think it will blow you away.
I'm pretty sure it will. That sounds just beautiful. Beautiful. What
It's
was your
beautiful, but it's hard. It's hard. It's hard
Yeah.
to see the truth of some of it. So take it a little at a
Mhm,
time. And yeah, that's part of shamanism, maybe part of witchcraft, is being able to look at the truth unflinchingly, where most people cannot do that.
mhm.
It takes a lot of courage to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's why not everyone feels that call towards shamanism. When you look at the way that kind of smaller societies would operate where people had roles in it. In fact, there's a marketing teacher actually that I follow called Tad Hargrave, who has a company called Marketing for Hippies. And he brings in all of these lovely cultural stories and references into the way that we are looking at marketing as storytelling, but more so from that perspective of what is it? Marketing becomes the story that you're telling about your role in your community. And he said, he speaks quite often about this, that one of the reasons that we have issues with this in the West is because societies used to recognize the multiple roles that we all play and would tell you, the elders would tell you what your role was and guide you, that there was that sense of like you had full support in becoming that version of yourself. And like you've said, we've lost that in our society. So we're like swimming around trying to figure out like who we are and who we're here to be. And as a consequence of being that version of ourselves, then doing in a way that's bringing value to our communities. And we're trying to figure it out on our own. And
Yep.
that's a virtually impossible task. And I think that in terms of the role that a shaman would play, we can kind of clearly see that they play a particular role of guiding from a kind of spiritual perspective and a wider picture perspective. But each one of us plays a role. We're not all drawn to shamanism, but we all have an important role to play. We are each a thread in this tapestry of life, as I like to think of it. And I think so much of what we're struggling with is that in our culture, we have no reference for that. We have nobody supporting us with that. We have no connection to our history, that used to be how it was, that we would be guided on that path. And
Hmm.
now we're sort of having to write our own stories by ourselves, but with like no reference material.
Hmm.
And that's a really hard place to be. But again, like you're saying, if we can sit with that discomfort and trust that there's actually an unfolding process that's going on, that, like I was
Hmm.
saying with the little tugs of purpose, little things start to come to you that
Hmm.
start to guide you if you're open to it as you take off the blinders and you expand your vision even beyond the physical sense. of vision, but like your wider senses, things start to unfold if you are present enough and trusting enough in the whole process of it.
Mhm. I think you're right. And I agree with you that you can't do it completely on your own. It's impossible. You do need to find and dig around to find teachers and guides and information and experiences that will help you.
Mhm.
Um, I do believe we need help to do that. And then following those things that attract you, as you're talking about, then we have to be able to use discernment to know once we get into it, is this right for me or is it not? And discernment about teachers, especially spiritual, I'm using quotes,
Yeah.
quotation marks, spiritual teachers. Oh boy, need a
Yeah.
lot of discernment and um, wisdom about that,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Have you had any issues yourself with not so great teachers?
I've had experience with teachers not as, how shall I put this? I didn't agree with their ethics.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And initially was okay with that because I was getting so much out of the teaching, but then eventually just it just felt icky and weird and I
Mhm.
couldn't be part of it anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I bet a lot of people on a spiritual path have had that experience. Have you?
Not so much, no, not so much an icky experience, but I think more and I don't necessarily think that this is an unhealthy thing, but I feel as though I've come across various people where they have probably similar to you, that they have served my growth at certain periods, and then I felt out of alignment
Mm, mhm,
with not so much with their teachings, but the way that they were perhaps delivering it or something about, so not necessarily questioning the truth of the teachings, but questioning the my relationship with or my need for that particular
mm,
teacher to be the
mhm,
vehicle for it, and then
mhm,
moving forward from that. But I also think that's part of this journey that we're on, is because it helps us, like you're saying, to sharpen our sense of discernment, and to, when you have those kinds of moments of like, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good," that's actually such a gift reflected back, to be able to ask, "Why doesn't that feel good?" And to hear that voice within ourselves that's like, "No, no, no," for whatever reason, because again, going back to the whole Lilith archetype, we've had that shut off for us. We've been
mhm,
told not to complain, not to question. There's been a lot of that kind of
mm.
energy put around us, that even to recognize that feeling of like, "Oh, that doesn't feel good," is such a gift of awakening ourselves again.
Now you're
Mhm.
making me think about the Me Too movement and how so many women have had really negative experiences because they were never taught to stand up and say, "No,
Yeah.
I'm not okay with this. I'm not doing this." Um, yeah, that ties into it a lot.
100%. 100%. I mean, one of the reasons that I feel as though for myself, I have been embodying Lilith energy my entire life without knowing it. It's only recently that I've come to see it through that lens, and in seeing it through that lens have been able to reclaim it. But before, I was looking at myself like, what's wrong with me? I'm the
Mhm,
problem. And
mhm,
there was a distinct example of this that happened in my life while I was at art school. And we, as part of our program, we would have these small, what they call critique groups, where we would be talking about either artwork or movements or whatever, and learning to actually have critical thinking around art and to talk about it. And there was a guy who was in my little group who would constantly say things like, whenever I or another one of the women would say something, he would say, "Wow, that's really smart for a woman." Or, "I didn't think a woman could think like that." And he was being dead serious. And I didn't speak up the first time. No one else was speaking up. And then a few of us were kind of talking behind the scenes and saying like how wrong that was and how uncomfortable we felt. And finally one day he said something along those lines again. And I felt the fire just starting and like coming out. And I had kind of kept the fire like here, suppressed it, and then all of a sudden it was like the top of the pot flew off and I just said what I wanted to say, which was basically, and I said it in a fairly nice way considering how like angry I was, but I was like,
Yeah.
that's not okay. That's just not okay. And I ended up a couple of years later doing some work for the leader of our program in her studio. I was like her studio assistant. And a job at a local gallery had come up and my name had been put forth and she was affiliated with this gallery and she said, "But there are some concerns about you." And I was like, "What concerns are there?" And she said, "There's concerns about whether or not you're able to work with men," and then reference this incident. And so that reinforced for me, don't speak up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
I said to her, I explained what had happened, and it wasn't until I said to her that another woman in my program who had a more reserved, kind of meeker personality, so she wasn't gonna stand up, but she agreed with me standing up. It wasn't until I said that she agreed with me saying something that my instructor saw my point of view around it, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is women doing it to women," right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I was so I didn't at the time, I didn't necessarily have the perspective or the language to realize where my rage was coming from in that moment, but I was so hurt and so angry and doing that thing that I think that so many of us women do of playing back over in my head the whole incident and like judging myself for like through that whole thing instead of looking at I was right to say something. In fact, it wasn't even that I was right to say something, that I have a right to say something. I have a right to my voice. I have a right to my feelings because we've been taught that we don't and that we're a problem, right? Like we get called all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
words
Mm-hmm.
for doing
Mm-hmm.
that.
That's true. So true. What a sad and common story that is that you just shared. And I would add that anyone who's a minority or in a marginalized group would relate to that, which I've recently learned besides the term microaggressions. This could be called subtle acts of exclusion, what that guy was saying to you. And because we're taught to be good girls, to be nice, to not cause problems, to not make waves. That's one reason why we may keep that inside until it exploded out in anger. What if, as little girls, we were taught, or as not just girls, any kid, if we were taught to say, hey, that's not right. That you can't say that to me, and set your own clear boundaries and be so firm in them that you're willing to walk away from that situation if they won't comply. That would be huge if we all were taught that as children. And the other thing is standing up for someone else if you see it being done to someone else. Oh, so much miscommunication, misunderstandings. That guy probably isn't a mean or evil person. He just doesn't, he's being run by a story that he's been told and that he believes that
Totally.
girls aren't smart, they're not talented, they're not whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Exactly. Exactly. So again, to your point, it's recognizing he is also in a sense I don't really like using this term because I don't think that we are it seems to take away our power, but he's sort of a victim of the stories that society is telling as well. Like he's been consumed by these stories and believes them. And again, is acting from that perspective. So now I'm able to have compassion for him. In the moment, I was not able to have compassion. I was very
Mm,
angry. But I
yeah.
also see how that has translated to so many I speak for myself, but I know that this goes beyond just me, like, not even really knowing what it is I want at times because I have not been taught to check in with that part of myself that acknowledges even having a want or a need. Like,
Yeah.
even I heard somebody talking about this recently, and it was so simple. I was like, "Oh my god, I've done this too." Like, if you're with somebody and you're thinking about going for lunch or whatever, like, "Oh, what do you feel like eating?" "Oh, I don't know. What do you feel like eating?" "Oh, I don't know. It doesn't matter to me." That kind we are taught that instead of just being like, "You know, I think I want tacos today." Like
Yep.
that you see how it, like, runs throughout our lives in all these different ways because we're so out of touch with ourselves.
So true. We're not allowed to have needs. And you're right. We don't know how to access what they might be. Very sad.
Mhm.
Well, you're right. It's changing, though. It's changing a lot.
It is
Probably
changing.
I imagine listeners of this podcast are among that group who are questioning a lot of things that they've been taught.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a
A
good
and
thing.
it is a really good thing, and it's also kind of a hard place to be, which is part of why I was interested in creating this community because we're often sort of the black sheeps that are in our family groups, in our friend groups, in our community groups that are engaging differently with the world, and when you present something that's different,
Mm,
everything around you kind of wants to change that within you. And so actually recognizing that you even acknowledging that you feel like tacos today and saying that and being okay with that, that's part of creating the ripple of change and
mhm.
modeling it for others that it's okay to have wants and needs. And I think too, to kind of like bring it back with some of the dog stuff, because Lucky's been a huge teacher for me with all of this stuff that he has wants and needs, and he is totally okay with having those wants and needs, right? He's not, there's no shame. There's not an ounce of shame around him having any particular want or need, right?
Yes, that's good. I like that.
It's so true. And I see him reflecting that back to me. And it shows me where I still struggle with it. And
Mhm.
and where I'm being invited through his lack of shame around this, where he kind of looks at me like, of course, right? That it's an invitation back to myself of where am I still holding little remnants of shame about acknowledging who I am and what I want and what I need. And I know you've talked a little bit as well about your dog being such a mirror around things for yourself too.
Oh gosh, so much. My dog, I have a little Italian Greyhound named Sophia. She's on my lap right now, where she usually is if I'm sitting down. And she's almost 11 in a few weeks, 11 years old. She is the sweetest, most wonderful dog, but she does have some health problems, as you know, as I've talked about. Um, Nothing crazy, just they call it chronic inflammatory bowel disease. That's what the vets say it is, triggered by stress or eating the wrong food. So what this has challenged me with is having to look at my own controller impulses, my desire to know what's wrong. How do I fix it? I don't want it to be this way. I'm not going to accept that it's this way. Um, just it's been huge. And I have this belief currently that if I someday, before the end of this little girl's life, can master having complete compassion for her and me around control, then that'll be something to be proud of. And I don't know if I can do it, but I'm working on it. Oh, it's so funny, like trying to figure out, well, what diet should she be on? You're very familiar with this, trying a million different things and realizing finally there is no one perfect diet, but we found the best we can so far, or supplement, or medication, or whatever. So that's part of it, wanting to know and wanting to control, and I can't. And my current trajectory of personal growth right now is about that, not accepting reality as it is. It's so hard.
It is. It is. I can relate to that. And there's something about when your pet is sick on some level that it just like it evokes like it's the mama bear thing, right? Like you just want to do the best that you can for your dog. And so we go, especially those of us that tend to have those issues for controlling, and I think there's quite a few of us listening that do that can relate to this.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
is like it lights a fire under that. It totally does. I was recently talking to the veterinarian, Dr. Odette Suter, about some of this we touched on it in the conversation I had with her around the microbiome, but it stemmed from one of her newsletters that she sent out that I thought was just so provocative because she was talking about her own journey with her with health issues for herself and then having to come to I mean really sort of a spiritual awakening around it where is there a way for us to embrace that whatever is happening, either in ourselves, in our own bodies, or in our pets and theirs, as being perfect just as it is? And that's really challenging for us, especially from the Western perspective. And you'll know this from the Western medical perspective that it's so allopathic in nature, like get rid of the symptom, get
Yep.
rid of the thing, the fixing of the thing
Yep.
without looking at the underlying cause necessarily. And that underlying cause might not be a physical thing, that might very well be a story, right? When you take it all the way back. And is it possible in that acknowledgement of that root that it's a gift, despite what our experiences of it, despite what it looks like? It's not denying the experience, it's not denying the upset, the fear, and all that kind of stuff, but it's again repurposing coming from that kind of 5D perspective, repurposing what we are experiencing in this 3D as a teacher for us to grow through it. And
Mhm.
that's, I mean, it's an easier thing to talk about than it is when you're actually experiencing it, but catching ourselves in those moments where we can possibly say, hold on, what is this teaching me?
Yeah, that is a very wise perspective. And you're right, it's not easy. Part of the coaching that I do includes positive intelligence. And that's a big part of it is believing and understanding that everything can be converted to a gift or opportunity. And when you
Mm,
first hear that, you're like, no, not everything, maybe some things, but not everything, but actually everything. And of course, that's our mindset. And you might refer to that as mental fitness. And
mhm.
that's part of mental fitness. So yeah, I applaud you for doing that, encouraging your listeners to do that. I think it's huge. I mean, we can use any relationship for growth. And the one with our pets is different. And as you alluded to, there's an emotional element that gets thrown in. And I have never had children, but I imagine if you have kids that have illness or whatever issue you're dealing with, it's even 100 times more. So, yeah, finding the gift in challenges is a huge part of personal growth.
Absolutely. So when
Yeah.
you are working with people in the capacity as a coach and you're helping them through some of this stuff, what are some things that you might be doing to support them? Like and how could listeners potentially apply something today if they're in that kind of a situation where they're like, this absolutely sucks. How am I supposed to see this as an opportunity for growth? Do you have any like nuggets of wisdom?
Well, some of the things that I teach people is mindfulness practices. That's part of the positive intelligence model. And most people are not willing or able to sit down and meditate, like formal meditation for 20 minutes, even though that's hugely valuable. Most people can't do it or they don't have time to do it, and that's okay. You can do little moments, 30 seconds, 2 minutes at a time, multiple times through the day when you feel what we call your saboteurs, those internal negative, unhealthy, critical voices coming in. And, every day it's happening constantly once you become aware of it. So that's the first step, become aware of it, because we just think that's part of us. We think that's a normal part of us. So conceptualizing it as not something that has to run us, we can manage it. Never 100%, but we can manage it pretty well. So mindfulness practices. And then strengthening your sage powers, we call them in positive intelligence. And part of the sage powers are that perspective of gifts and opportunities in every challenge. And then you can learn skills to magnify your sage powers, which include, let me see if I can get them all straight. Explore, which is like curiosity, empathy for yourself and others, navigating, which is getting the, as you said, the big picture, the high above perspective on, if I was at the end of my life, would this really matter? What would I wish had happened or I had done? And then innovates, finding creative solutions. And then activate is the fifth sage power of, taking clear, calm, focused action. So those are the things we work on with clients. And it's an awesome program because it's simple and you don't need to go have psychotherapy for this, which a lot of people don't want or need, so I love it. It was developed for busy corporate executives originally who, need results fast. And so that's how it works.
I love it. I love it. And you have developed something special for Mystic Dog Mama listeners, if I'm remembering correctly.
I have. I'm so curious. I have in my mind like images of who they are, and I would love to actually find out who they are. So I would like to offer group coaching. It's a program I call Mental Fitness Boot Camp. And the first 6 weeks are running through the Positive Intelligence program, which includes a phone app and video modules and weekly sessions with me in a small group of other people. And then, so that's for 6 weeks. And then there's 6 more weeks of focused coaching based on that foundation. So it's a 12-week program and you get to benefit from the group dynamic. And so if 3 or more of your listeners are interested, we can form a group, and I'm offering that at a discounted rate of $1,200 per person. Each person will also get one-on-one coaching with me as well.
Oh, amazing. And how would they go about signing up for that if they're interested, Amy?
We can put a link directly to my calendar schedule so that they can get on there and talk to me because they probably will have questions.
Yeah.
But they can also go to my website and read about it as well. And even positiveintelligence.com if they want to learn about that part of the program. But yeah, we can put all those links and websites and info in the show notes if that's
Perfect.
okay with you.
Absolutely. No, I'm thrilled to do that. I think that's amazing. And like we were saying earlier, doing this work is, I would argue, impossible on your own. You can get to a certain point for sure doing it on your own, but there is such value in doing it in community and having somebody else there who can reflect back to you, who is, in a sense, a kind of neutral party that can help you see yourself in a way that you just can't see yourself because
Yep.
it's just not possible. So I love that you're offering as a group program as well, because there's so much learning that happens in community. Truly, we often think that the one-on-one is what we want to do, and that one-on-one is fantastic. But I also love group learning because you get to learn from other people sharing their stories and experiences too, that
Mm-hmm.
reflects something back to you that you wouldn't have thought of.
That's so true. And with this group offer that I'm making, at the end of the 6 weeks, the group will come together and decide what their joint focus will be for the next 6 weeks. And it might be something related to topics that challenges in topics that you talk about on your podcast. That's
Oh,
what I'm
amazing.
thinking anyway.
Amazing. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for your generosity of putting that together for people. I know they're going to love it. And like we said, we'll put all the information in the show notes so you can contact Amy with any questions and get all the juicy stuff from there.
Great. Thank you so much. And you know what, for people not watching and if they're just listening to your podcast, yourtruestorycoaching.com is my website, and that you can link to everything from there as well.
Perfect. Perfect. And should they just mention that they're part of the Mystic Dog Mama group? That's
Definitely.
so
There's a
easy to do.
contact me page and they can put that in the notes, and then I'll get right back to them and we'll figure it out.
Oh, perfect. I love it so much. I want to be part of that. That's amazing.
I would love if you would. I was thinking, I wonder if Alexia would like to join this.
It'd be a lot of fun, a lot of fun. And I feel like you and I, we could just talk for hours. This is so amazing, such rich stuff. It's awesome.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it so much. I really didn't know which direction we'd go in. We didn't talk about dogs much at all, but I think that's okay.
It is okay. Well, and that's the thing. That's something I like about this Spotlight series as well, is it's shining a light on the fact that like dogs are part of our stories, but we are also all of this other stuff. And as we are addressing all this other stuff, it's impacting our relationship with our dogs and vice versa. So
Yeah.
it's always interesting to see somebody who's like living the work. I think that's an important thing that I'm interested in doing with this community is giving that full perspective of what it means to live this life, to walk this spiritual path with our dogs. And yeah, of course, that requires some focus on our dogs, but it also requires focus on ourselves. And so it's
Yeah.
an opportunity to focus on ourselves, which I love. But I will ask you one last question, which is related to dogs.
Okay.
It's a question that I ask all of my guests. And it's what has Sophia or other dogs in your life, from your perspective at this point in your own story, taught you about what it means to be human?
Oh, wow. Uh, I would say she has shown me and other dogs too the wild, untamed element. And although she's a domesticated animal, and humans are the most domesticated animals of all, she's taught me about that playful, uninhibited part of myself that I have learned over the years to kind of press down and not fully express, and how joyful that is. And in playing with her, oh my God, it's so fun. Just, you know, letting go and getting into her experience and what is she feeling. And I think the other critical thing is about being in the moment. Dogs don't live in the past or the future. Maybe they've been scarred by trauma, psychologically, but they don't dwell on the past, I don't believe. They don't worry about the future, I don't think. They're very present moment.
Mhm.
I think that's why they forgive us for things. And oh my God, I would love to be that present and just chilling in the moment. Boy, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, what is that like?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's amazing. Amy, thank you so much for being here, for your generosity of spirit, for your offer to listeners, for just being the light that you are in the world. I'm so grateful you joined me today.
Oh, thanks, Alexia. It was so fun. And I really appreciate the messages that you're sharing with your audience. I think it's well needed and well appreciated.
Well, thank you. And we'll have to have you back. So, especially after we've read each other's books and we can talk about the books because
Oh,
I love
perfect.
doing that.
Perfect. Oh, that would be awesome. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. All right. We'll make that happen. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining Amy Arnold and me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. What were some of your favorite nuggets? Like Amy mentioned, she's generously crafted a 12-week group coaching program at a really special rate specifically for Mystic Dog Mama listeners. In order to run it, she'll need 3 or more people for the group, so I highly encourage you to reach out to Amy if this is something you think you might be interested in. Just contact her via her website, yourtruestorycoaching.com, and tell her you're a Mystic Dog Mama listener. I've left links in the show notes to Amy's website and calendar booking system. And I've left links to the books that we mentioned in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing, liking, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the podcast. These all mean so much to me and to the lovely algorithms that help other Mystic Dog Mamas and Papas who are looking for community to find us. And if you'd like me to do a future episode on a particular topic, or you'd like me to reach out to a potential guest, let me know. You can reach me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. Okay, until next time.